Silence is often admired in the abstract, praised as the calm beyond chaos, the gentle pause between storms, the inner sanctuary where life finally begins to make sense. But inside relationships, silence has a way of changing its meaning entirely. It becomes heavier, denser, a kind of emotional gravity that pulls us into places we didn't know we still carried. The silence between two people who once knew how to talk, how to laugh, how to touch without fear does not feel peaceful. It feels like the quiet of a room after something fragile has been broken. No sound, yet everything is unmistakably loud. We often think of silence as the absence of sound, but in relationships, it is more like the presence of something unnamed, something we hope isn't real, something we aren't ready to face. Most people grow up imagining that connection is built on moments of closeness, warm conversations, mutual care, the playful ease of companionship. But the more honest truth is that relationships are built just as much in the invisible spaces between words, in the pauses, in the hesitations, in the decisions to speak or to stay quiet. And what terrifies us is not silence itself, but what we fear silence means. The mind, when deprived of explanation, invents its own. It fills the gaps with stories, with predictions, with childhood echoes we thought we had outgrown long ago. That is why silence inside relationships rarely feels neutral. It feels contaminated by memory, by old wounds still waiting for closure, by fears we inherited before we even understood what love required of us. A partner growing distant does not simply trigger anxiety. It reactivates every moment in our personal history when distance meant danger, when silence was punishment, when quietness was the precursor to emotional abandonment. For many of us, silence was not a gentle thing when we were young. It was the cold tone of a parent overwhelmed by their own life. It was the wordless disappointment from someone who did not know how to comfort us. It was the slow withdrawal that preceded unpredictable anger, or the emotional absence of someone we desperately wanted connection from. And so in adulthood, the silence of someone we love is no longer about the present moment. It becomes a tunnel back into older rooms of fear. What we fear is not merely losing a partner. What we fear is re-entering the emotional atmosphere where love felt conditional, where affection could be withdrawn without warning, where safety depended on our ability to detect invisible signs before it was too late. Silence feels terrifying because it forces us back into the internal architecture of our first emotional losses. When the person we love goes quiet, even for reasons that may have nothing to do with us, our nervous system does not negotiate. It reacts. It remembers. It protects. The body starts preparing for impact long before the mind understands what's happening. And so we find ourselves spiraling through questions. Did I do something wrong? Are they pulling away? Is this the beginning of the end? Are they losing interest? Are they angry but not saying it? Am I about to be abandoned again? This interrogation is not rational, but neither is it foolish. It is a survival strategy shaped by the emotional demands of a younger version of ourselves who learned that silence predicted danger. The adult understands that people get tired, stressed, distracted, lost in their own worries. But the child inside us still panics at the first sign of withdrawal. This internal conflict between the rational self and the wounded self is one of the central reasons silence in relationships feels unbearable. We are not reacting to the moment. We are reacting to the sum of our unhealed history. Silence has a way of amplifying the stories we fear most about ourselves. In the absence of reassurance, we often assume the worst, that we are unlovable, inadequate, unworthy, inconvenient, or simply too much. We confuse someone else's internal state with our own value. We take their quietness as a verdict on our identity. And yet the cruelest part is that both people in the relationship may be terrified of silence for different reasons. One person goes quiet because they're overwhelmed, unsure how to articulate their emotions, afraid their feelings will cause conflict, or convinced that speaking honestly will make things worse. The other person interprets this quietness as emotional withdrawal, punishment, or rejection. Both are afraid. Both are carrying their own childhood scripts. Both are misunderstanding the nature of the gap between them, but neither knows how to bridge it. This is the tragedy of relational silence. It is so often a misunderstanding disguised as a threat. Silence becomes a mirror where we see only our own insecurities reflected back at us. But we rarely stop to ask, what is the silence trying to protect? What if the quietness is not a sign of indifference, but fear? What if the other person is not withdrawing from us, but retreating from the intensity of their own emotions? What if their silence is not about losing love, but about not knowing how to express it without feeling exposed, incompetent, or ashamed? We live in a culture that encourages emotional suppression. We are taught to be strong, to be stoic, to handle things alone. We are rarely taught how to speak our truth without guilt or fear. And so, when confronted with relational discomfort, hurt feelings, disappointment, confusion, many people default to silence, not out of malice, but out of emotional illiteracy.
Silence feels safer than vulnerability, safer than conflict, safer than saying something that might hurt or be misunderstood. Yet the irony is that silence, this attempt to avoid pain, creates the very pain we hoped to escape. It becomes the emotional distance that slowly erodes the foundation of the relationship. Silence is not just the absence of words, it is the absence of clarity. And without clarity, the human mind suffers. We are meaning-making creatures. When something matters to us, we need context. We need narrative. Without it, our inner world collapses into uncertainty. That uncertainty is what terrifies us, not silence itself. In the quiet moments of a relationship, we become acutely aware of how fragile connection truly is. We start to see how dependent we are on reciprocity. The small gestures, the casual "are you okay?", the soft moments of checking in that signal emotional safety. When those small signals disappear, even temporarily, the nervous system starts bracing for loss. Our culture often glamorizes independence, idolizes self-reliance, but biologically and emotionally, humans are built for attachment. We are wired to attune to the emotional availability of those we depend on. Silence disrupts that attunement. It leaves us guessing, searching, reaching out into the dark. Eventually, silence becomes terrifying because it reveals how vulnerable we truly are to the people we love. When someone's voice can calm the shaking inside us, or their distance can resurrect ghosts from our childhood, we realize that intimacy is not gentle. It is not simple. It is not safe, even when it is beautiful. Relationships are a constant negotiation between closeness and fear. We want to be deeply known, but we fear what might happen if we are. We want openness from the other, but we are unsure if we deserve it. We long to be understood without explanation, yet explaining ourselves feels overwhelming. Silence becomes the uninvited reminder of these contradictions. It exposes the parts of us that want reassurance but struggle to ask for it. The parts that crave intimacy but tremble at the idea of being too dependent. The parts that want to trust but have been taught, painfully, that trust is fragile. In truth, silence is terrifying because it reveals the emotional distance we already carry inside ourselves. It exposes the conversations we avoid, the truths we suppress, the fears we have not yet named. When someone else goes quiet, it amplifies our own internal quietness, our inability to articulate what we feel, what we need, what we long for. Silence in relationships becomes a confrontation with the parts of us that still feel unseen, even to ourselves. And yet, silence can also be a doorway. A painful one, yes, but a necessary one. Because beneath the fear lies a deeper truth. We are terrified of silence because we want connection so desperately. The fear itself is evidence of how deeply we care. Instead of treating silence as a verdict, we could begin to treat it as a signal, an invitation to slow down, to check in with ourselves, to approach the other person with curiosity rather than accusation. The terror of silence softens when we understand that both people are afraid, both people are longing, both people are trying in the only ways they know how. What breaks relationships is not silence on its own, but silence left unexplored. When silence is met with gentleness rather than panic, it becomes possible to see what lies beneath. The longing for safety, the desire to be understood, the fear of repeating old emotional patterns. The work, then, is not to eliminate silence, but to learn how to step into it without letting fear dictate the story. To understand that love requires dialogue, not just in words, but in presence, in reassurance, in the courage to speak even when the voice trembles. Silence becomes less terrifying when we stop treating it as the enemy. It becomes softer when we learn to ask, "What are you feeling beneath the quiet?" And when we allow others to ask us the same. It becomes survivable when we realize that the stories we tell ourselves in the dark are not the truth. They are echoes of a younger self still waiting to feel safe. And maybe the deepest truth is this. Silence terrifies us not because it signals abandonment, but because it reminds us how much love matters, how much connection means, how profoundly human it is to fear losing what we cherish. If we learn to listen, not just to the silence, but to the person behind it, and to the person we are within it, then silence, rather than the distance that destroys us, can become the bridge that leads us back to each other.